Morning and welcome to Week 8, Remote Sensing 1, Winter Term 2020. I got a lot of things going on this week. As you know, I've been meeting with several of you over the last week or so regarding your final projects. And, these required meetings, I think they're very helpful. I've really appreciated the conversations I've had with everyone and, have enjoyed them. As you know, our final project proposal is due later today. I won't be scheduling any more meetings today. Everything has been scheduled and carried out, so I won't be scheduling any more pre-proposal meetings today. I have a very busy day ahead of me. This overview for Week 8, I'm going to follow the normal routine in overviews of looking at last week, looking at this week, Week 8, last week, Week 7, this week, Week 8, and next week, Week 9. And so in Week 7, and you probably noticed that in Week 5 and 6, I'll go even further back, we were looking carefully at Chapter 7. This is because we were getting ready to start working through these two big techniques that we work on in our last two activities in this course, image classification, supervised image classification, and change analysis. So there's a lot in Chapter 7 on both of these techniques, okay? And I'm sure you guys are keeping up with the reading. This is an important part of this course. And just to review for you, in the syllabus, which is in this course, item 1.1.1. In other words, it's in the table of contents. So contents is the first item past the opening page, the first item in the D2L page. It's at the top of the table of contents in introduction and course files, I believe, something like that. There's in the course files folder, and it's the first item in the course file. So this is an important document, and you should be going back to this every week really to see where we are in the course, what readings are assigned, and so on, because these haven't changed. We're pretty much on track in this course. So in weeks 5 and 6, and so in week 5, Chapter 7, page 485 to 537. This is an important section on image enhancement and image processing, okay? And then week 6, Chapter 7, 537 through 570. So there's almost 100 pages there in this chapter over these 2 weeks. And then there's more than 100 pages because I add some more at the end of this section. And again, I say in week 6, I say this section will allow you to understand why image classification is so important. Read carefully, and then also read these other two sections, okay? So I try to give you a guide for reading, and I have different styles of reading that I use for the things that I'm reading. Some things I read very carefully, word by word. I want to understand every sentence before I go on to the next sentence. That kind of reading, that's a particular kind of reading. I reserve that for things that I need to understand, typically relatively short documents. And then I have other styles of reading that are faster styles of reading. And I was actually a speed reader as a child, and I've slowed down quite a bit as I've gotten older, although I've found that recently, over the last year or so, I've gotten a lot faster again. I've speeded back up, and I've found that in speed reading, my comprehension of the things that I'm reading actually is enhanced to a certain extent in terms of understanding the metastructure of the whole thing that I'm reading by reading it faster. You get it in there faster, and you're able to kind of get it all mixing together in your brain, and you can understand it, or at least I can understand it at that point a little bit better. So, for instance, in a number of our conversations, we've talked about the NDVI with a number of you. And the NDVI, you might think, well, where did he pull that rabbit out of the hat? The NDVI. Well, the NDVI is it's in several places in the text, but there's a big section on the NDVI and other normalized difference indexes there's a big section in Chapter 7 on that. And the NDVI, if your normalized difference is, it's very, very important to being able to analyze vegetation. And a lot of what we do is about analyzing vegetation, analyzing the health of vegetation, and so on. So this is in the readings. It's in that Chapter 7 section that I singled out for 2 weeks and told you that this was very important in this course. Okay, so last week, change analysis. There's some important content there, right? This is an overview. This is not the content. This is an overview of the content. What is an overview? Well, it's a view over other things. Where are the other things? Well, the other things are in the they're in the here. They're right in here. They're under content. Okay, so and so in content, you can see we're up through week 8, right? And we've had, if you go back to our course page, let's see, where are we? Yes, course home. If you go back to this course page, you'll see that there are overviews lined up here right on the front of the course page. This is not the content. These are the overviews. Okay, so there's an introduction. There's an overview, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's not the course. The course, the meat of the course, is in here. Again, pardon the reference to the meat of the course, the meat and vegetables, and just vegetables if you'd like, if you're vegetarian. So, but the content is in here, right? It's in here in these modules. So here's the table of contents, and this is the content. So in content, you'll find all these different things. And in week 7, last week, we had change analysis and image differencing, right? And then this week, in week 8, moving forward, right, we have some more content. This is actually a very short little presentation on hyperspectral imaging. Okay, hyperspectral imaging. What is hyperspectral imaging? And so there's a couple of different projects that I point out here, Avarice and Hyperion. Avarice is a sensor that's still being flown out of the Bay Area, actually. So a lot of the data for Avarice is out west, as it happens. They shoot a lot of it out west, and it's generally experimental. But this is a hyperspectral sensor that they carry on the U-2 aircraft, the former spy aircraft that now has been converted to civilian use. Flies very high, 60, 70,000 feet altitude. And the Hyperion is another really interesting project. Well, where can you find Hyperion? So again, a lot of what I point out in this week's content is about Hyperion. Hyperion is a space-based hyperspectral imaging sensor, and it operated from 2000. Let's look in Earth Explorer. So here in Earth Explorer, under data sets, you can find the Hyperion. It's in there, and it operated from, see, here's E01. This is the Ali that I mentioned. This was the test sensor for what became the OLI, the OLI, the sensor, the main sensor on Landsat 8, right? So the Hyperion was also on the E01 satellite, and it's looking even further into the future. So if you want to know what's the next thing after Landsat, right? Hyperspectral sensing. That's where it's going to be. What is hyperspectral sensing? Okay, so in hyperspectral sensing, instead of having, and again, there's a fair information page here, although the Hyperion has been shut down and the E01 has been shut down, but there is a fair information page that still has some links out to some information that you can gather on the Hyperion, and the data is still there. The Hyperion, as you can see, was operating from 2000 to 2017. And again, this is one of these experiments where it was intended to run for only a couple of years. When they first launched this, it would have been considered a success if it ran for a couple of years. But they kept it running for 17 years, and they actually had a long period where you could submit a request to have them turn it on and gather data over locations that maybe you're interested in, where you could get some hyperspectral data over locations that you're interested in. For that reason, you find a lot of this data, oddly enough, around Madison, Wisconsin. Why Madison, Wisconsin? Well, do the names Lillesand, Kiefer, Chipman, do they have any meaning to you? Well, those people are all at the University of Wisconsin, right, in Madison. So, you know, when they say, hey, turn your sensor on to NASA and USGS, they turn it on for them when it's coming over Madison. I just suspect, I don't know that firsthand, but I suspect that's probably what's happening there. But there's also some data over Chicago, some good Hyperion data over Chicago. So, and lots of other places in the world. It's a different kind of data. It's collected as strips normally, but hyperspectral data is, instead of having like 4, 7, 10, or 11 channels, this hyperspectral sensor has over 200 channels. And the channels in hyperspectral data and hyperspectral sensing are different from multispectral sensing, which is what we've been working with, because they're continuous. They overlap slightly from one to the other, and they image right through a large part of the spectrum. In the case of Hyperion, it covers the entire spectrum from the beginning with practically the ultraviolet all the way out to where channel 7 is, out around 2500 nanometers on the spectrum, in the mid-infrared, and everything in between, including the sections where there's very little energy coming through the atmosphere. So hyperspectral sensing, and again, I'm going to go back to the syllabus. I think I have it here. Yes. What did I say about hyperspectral sensing this week? Yes. No. Yes. Week 8. Hyperspectral analysis is the future that is here now. And give this chapter a quick read. This is the future of remote sensing. I believe that. I still believe that. I'm actually much more convinced of that over the last few years with some things I've seen in terms of what's happening in civilian remote sensing and in platforms and so on. So it's not just space-based. It's also on drones. Very low altitude hyperspectral sensing is going on right now. So take a look at that content for week 7. Again, hyperspectral's been around for some time. I first saw hyperspectral just articles about hyperspectral sensing and how it was being used in the 1980s. Okay? In the 1980s. Okay, boomer. All right, in the 1980s. Hyperspectral sensing. And I was kind of very puzzled by it at that time, and I've watched it slowly over the last 30, 40 years develop. It's here now. It's here. Okay? It's part of what we're doing. And not just in on Earth, because a lot of the planetary sensing that's taking place is hyperspectral sensors. And there's a hyperspectral sensor on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter that is orbiting Mars right now and gathering data right now, and they're using that to plan the locations where these Mars rovers are landing. And so I have some content in week 8 that is on planetary imaging. Just some teasers, okay? So where does planetary imaging start in the U.S.? Where is it controlled from? Where is it? It's at Caltech. It's at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Jet Propulsion Laboratory is huge. It's bigger than both DePaul campuses combined in terms of the area. Easily, way bigger because it's California, right? But JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, that's where planetary imaging starts. That's where it's controlled from, okay, by NASA. Huge NASA facility at Caltech. Okay, we all know about Caltech, right? So it starts at Caltech, but then sometimes Caltech farms it out to other places. And one of the places that they farmed out stuff, some of the stuff from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and a lot, actually there's some interesting NASA facilities, and there've always been a lot of interesting NASA research in universities in Arizona. Because I think it goes back to training for the Apollo astronauts that was done during the 1960s before we went to the moon to land on the moon, because there's some places that are kind of like the moon in terms of terrain and so on in Arizona and some other places out west. So they did training for these guys, even though we're still at Earth gravity. You couldn't simulate lunar gravity there, but they did train in those places. So the University of Arizona, then, is a place where you may want to take a look at this, okay? Now, here's HiRISE, okay? This is pretty cool. And so they're handling this stuff. And all of the data that's coming back from these satellites is either being converted or it's being, look, northern dunes and snowfall. Snowfall on Mars? Wow. Cool, huh? Look at these images. Very cool. But all the data is being converted, or it's coming in. I don't think it's coming in, but it's being converted, I believe, at University of Arizona into ArcGIS forms. And so the version of ArcGIS that you guys have on your computers, it has all the projections. Not all projections, for all of the objects, spheroidal objects in the solar system, but it has a lot of different projections and coordinate systems and spheroids and so on for georeferencing data on these planets. And Mars, we've got Mars nailed down in terms of the georeferencing of Mars, in terms of the mapping of Mars. So that's the first thing that you do when you show up, right? When Columbus showed up here and, started, doing what he did, then, he was also mapping, right? That's what you do when you explore places. And your generation will be the generation to do this, right? And how do I know that? Well, I just have a sense of that. But if you, again, go back and look at the, let's see, where am I? I got to find my way back to the syllabus. And what do I say about hyperspectral in here? Hyperspectral is the future that is now. Give this chapter a quick read. This is, again, here, chapter 6, rather lengthy. Radar and laser sensing are both active sensors, have become crucial in our exploration of the other planets and moons of the solar system. Titan, Europa, these moons of Saturn and Jupiter, that they're being explored by LIDAR and radar. That's how we're learning about them. Your generation will continue this work. If you want to be involved, this is where you start. Okay? Take a look at University of Arizona, the facilities there at the University of Arizona, and at this section on planetary, and it's going to be, if you're interested in this, you're going to get pulled in by what you're seeing, I think, here. So that's what we're doing in week 8. Next week, terrain analysis, and I'll assign some readings that'll be in the activity. They'll be relatively short, but I do have a relatively longish old school, new school take on terrain analysis for you. One involving passive sensors and one involving active sensors. Okay? So, week 8,